Welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. We're learning today about the mystical sparks all around us. What an interesting way to look at our lives. You know, somebody came into my office recently and told me about a huge problem that she has in her life. She called it the albatross around her neck. And it's obviously very painful. Very, very challenging. This person was looking for spiritual support and guidance as to how to deal with her very significant problem. And when you look at it from a human perspective, it's very, very painful. It's distressing. It's upsetting. But then when you take it, when you get into the helicopter and you look at it from a spiritual, mystical perspective, things become far more interesting and counterintuitive. You see, Chassidus explains to us that this world is filled with lost divine sparks. Misplaced sparks of divine energy that need to be returned to their rightful owner. What does that mean? It means that God deliberately placed divine energy in hard-to-find places in some sort of elaborate cosmic game of hide-and-seek, so that we Jews would be able to encounter these sparks, grapple with their captivity, and release them, restoring them to their rightful owner. Now, how do we do that?
Who's the rightful owner?
The rightful owner is Hashem, is holiness, is divine energy, right? But it's the divine energy which is lost and misplaced that we need to find, that we need to discover and what's the word? And restore. Let me give you some context. Good morning, Michael and Shelley. It's great to see you. Dean, where are you at 1:47 a.m. on Friday? Are you in Australia or New Zealand? Or like where is that? Please post, let us know. So let me explain how this works. It says that when God created the world, there was a massive amount of divine energy creating the world. And that divine energy, for some reason, exploded. It exploded. It was too much light for the vessels to contain. That's the language of Chassidus. Just to give an example of this, sometimes you can say something to a child and you can blow their mind. And it's a terrible thing to do. Like, when a parent has let's say when a parent has a difficult marriage, and the parent, instead of having an emotional intimacy with their spouse, will choose to place emotional intimacy on their child. It's a phenomenon called parentifying the child, where the child now becomes the confidant of the insecure parent. So instead of the parent being the parent to the child, the parent is looking to the child for emotional support. And that's a form of child abuse. It's actually a form of child abuse because, here the parent is telling the child about the imperfections of the spouse, of the father, and the child doesn't even know how to process this because he's a child, for heaven's sake. So this child is getting way too much information and actually causes long-lasting trauma within the child that lasts potentially for the rest of his life, influencing his own ability to be intimate with his own spouse and his own ability to be a proper parent and to be receptive, because his childhood was accelerated into adulthood when he was 6. Right, so he never had a chance to be a child. So this is way too much light for the vessel to receive. Right. Another example Chassidus will give us is, let's say if you pour boiling hot water into thin glass cups. What's going to happen? It's going to explode. It's going to break. Too much energy into too thin of a vessel, it's going to break. Right. So in much the same way, when God created the world, think about it. God Almighty Infinity created. Oh, he is in New Zealand. Wow, Dean's in New Zealand. Fantastic. Oh my God, that's amazing. Welcome, Dean. Good to see you. And James, I think you're also somewhere in Western Australia. So it's great to have you guys with us. You know, somebody texted me yesterday from Finland, Helsinki. He asked me for permission to put Finnish subtitles on my videos. We'll see what happens. Let's see what happens, folks. Okay. So anyways, back to the story here. It's worldwide wisdom. So the story is that when God created the world, it wasn't that God made a mistake, that he kind of miscalculated the capacity of this physical world to contain divine energy, but rather was actually by divine design. First, there was an explosion. This explosion resulted in 288 sparks, divine energy that were dispersed and trapped in this universe. Right? To give an example of what it's going to take to extract those sparks, we know, and we've discussed this before, but I'm going to touch on it briefly as we apply it personally today. We know that you're not allowed to go back to Egypt. It's a prohibition for a Jew to go back to live in Egypt. Why is that? The reason is the Torah says you're not allowed to go back to Egypt. Why? Spiritually speaking, because we have nothing else to do there. Why? Because the Jews have already extracted the massive amount of sparks that were trapped in Egypt. There was 202 sparks of divine energy out of a grand total of 288 sparks that were trapped in the land of Egypt. How did the Jews get the sparks out of Egypt? By enduring the Egyptian slavery there. Now that is a mind-blowing observation, because the moment you realize that it took, how many years were the Jews in Egypt? 210. They were there for 210 years of existence, but only 86 years of those 210 years were harsh, back-breaking slavery. But if you think about it, from a spiritual perspective, and again, unemotional, without us being emotional, we can't talk about the Holocaust because it's too recent. But we can talk about something 3,250 years ago because it's not emotional for us. So we can understand now that the reason why the Jews had to endure the unspeakable horrors of their time in Egyptian slavery was because they needed to extract the divine sparks that were embedded within that space. How do you do that? By maintaining your faith, notwithstanding the hardship, you extract the sparks. That's what happens. When you're able to maintain your vision, your mindset, without losing your strength, your faith, when you're faced with a great challenge, that's how you extract the spark embedded within, right? So it's a very, very powerful concept, which allows us to reinterpret how we see trials, tests, challenges that we face. We can now understand that the reason why we have to endure different sufferings is not because God is a sadist, not because God is trying to make our lives miserable, as much as the place that we are in is a place that has sparks, divine sparks embedded within, and they have our name on those sparks. Tanya teaches us in chapter 37 of Tanya that every single one of us has a unique piece of real estate in this world that only you are able to elevate. You are not just in this world as a passerby, as a spectator who is here to indulge in the luxuries and pleasantries of this world as much or as little as you want. No, you're here on a business trip. This life is a business trip. And a business trip isn't always pleasant because you have to do stuff that you don't necessarily want to do. So when your soul, like a heat-seeking missile, knows where those sparks are. Now, this is unconscious. It's subconscious. But your soul senses where those sparks are, and your soul will draw you to that place. That's why King David says in Psalms, "Re'evim gam tzameim nafsham b'hem tesatov." They are hungry, they are thirsty, but in truth, in reality, it's their soul that's pining to finish its mission. They think they're hungry for a beef burger. They think they're thirsty for a tequila, but really they're not. It's their soul that senses, like a heat-seeking missile, that within this beef burger, in that restaurant, within this tequila, in that bar, there lies your divine sparks, and that's why you have a craving for that item, right? That's why you have a craving. It's brilliant. King David shares with us the reason for our cravings. Now, it's only permissible cravings, by the way. If it's an impermissible craving, well, you desire a forbidden relationship, you can't say, well, must be my soul wants that forbidden relationship. No, it doesn't work like that. Rather, it's only when you have a permissible craving, but it helps us understand the secret behind our cravings. It also helps us understand the secret behind our sufferings. Why do you think you bought a home in Palm Beach Gardens? Why is it that Dean moved to New Zealand and Almighty O moved to Canada where there's no need for subtitles? Why is that? The reason is you moved to Canada, you New Zealand, and we to Palm Beach. The reason is because that is where our soul sensed our divine destiny. And it's in these places that we need to maintain our faith, that we need to be strong, that we need to lay tefillin and light Shabbos candles and influence another Jew to do the right thing. We need to do everything that we can in order to strengthen our faith in that specific location with the mezuzah, with the little Torah. And what we're doing then is that we're essentially elevating the sparks that are trapped in those locations. Now, admittedly, after the Jews came out of Egypt, which is why he doesn't recommend moving to Canada. Well, hopefully, Almighty, you can finish the sparks over there, so we don't have to. But if you don't do it, maybe Donald Trump is going to make Canada part of the United States, and we're going to have to.
It's all done. We're going to make Canada great again.
How do you calculate sparks in a certain location?
How do you calculate? How do you calculate sparks in a certain location? Well, I think life would be boring if you knew exactly. So it's one of the great mysteries of life, Steve, is that we don't know which sparks. Let's look at it this way. There's 288 sparks in totality. 202 were finished and they came out of Egypt. Because the Kabbalists tell us that it's 202 sparks that came out, that were redeemed from Egypt. Which is, by the way, why the Egyptian Exodus is such a cataclysmic event. Because, I mean, think about it. It was like, I don't know, what number is that? Is that like 55 or 65% of all of the sparks of world history were elevated in one event? I mean, that's pretty intense. So for the rest of time, for the past 3,250 years, we're only working on 86 sparks. That's it. But those 86 sparks can break down into millions and millions and millions of sub-sparks. Right? Sub-sparks. You get millions and millions and millions of sub-sparks that we need to elevate. Now, how do you know where they are? How do you know how much you have to do? You don't. You don't. There's a beautiful story, just to illustrate a beautiful story. A story about the Ruzhiner. They used to call him the Heilige Ruzhiner, Bistroller of Ruzhin, which means the holy person, the holy rabbi of Ruzhin. I don't know where Ruzhin is, but I imagine somewhere in Eastern Europe. Now, he had a shul. And in his shul, he had his Chassidim. Very nice. By the way, I just want to answer Jonathan's question. Jonathan asked the question, what about Maimonides in living in Egypt? The reason is he was forced to live there because he was running away from ISIS. Maimonides was running away from ISIS. The early version of ISIS was called the Almohads. The Almohads actually it kind of sounds a little like Hebrew. Elokim Echad. Elokim Echad. Almohad. Right? Which means one God. These were the early Muhammad followers, the early Islamists that believed that God is one, and therefore all other people have to be murdered unless they accept their faith, right? So they were the Almohads. So Maimonides, I believe he was born in Fez, Morocco. He ran away to Spain, and he was running away to different places until eventually he settled in Egypt, which was the only safe haven that they could live in at that time. It's quite amazing that Maimonides wrote the first encyclopedia of the Torah, the most comprehensive encyclopedia of the Torah that we have over there. I highly encourage you to read it in English. It is 14 volumes that he wrote on the run during 10 years of escaping the Almohads, so in his 20s. So he would actually sign his name, Yonatan, as I, Moses, the son of Maimon, the Sephardi, who violates 3 sins every single day against his will. That's because he was forced against his will to live in the land of Egypt. Okay, good. So here it is. So back to what we're saying. So how do we know what the divine sparks are? What was I about to say? I forgot. Sub-spark. Oh, the story I was about to say is that Rabbi Shol of Ruzhin. What happened was that in his shul, he had Chassidim. Now, one day, a guy walks in. A guy clearly looked very secular. Didn't even look Jewish. The guy walks in and he says, "Is this the place of prayer?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "I have your side for my father tonight." Clearly said that, therefore, he was a Jew. And somebody helped him pray. But after the prayer service, the Ruzhiner himself comes out of his room and he sits down next to this man and he says, "Tell me, it's your father's yahrzeit. We should make a l'chaim. We should make a l'chaim for your father's memory. You know, you're supposed to sponsor a kiddush when you have a yahrzeit, right? And you'll see why in a few moments." So he said, "Fine, but we don't have any vodka." So the rabbi said to him, "You should send someone with money to go buy some cake and some vodka." Sounds like a solicitation, right? But it's not. He sends him off. He gives him a guy a ruble or two, goes off to buy some cake and some vodka. Fine. The guy comes back a few minutes later. Now the Ruzhiner himself is sitting with this guy, so all the Chassidim are around. It becomes a big party. So there's some cake and vodka arrive. They pour some vodka to the rabbi and to this guy doing yahrzeit. And in the traditional Russian way, the Russians they don't spend too much time with the vodka inside their cup, right? I don't think they even bother with cups in general. They go straight, they go straight to the bottle. So here he is, the vodka's in the cup in front of him. He goes, knocks it down. And the Ruzhiner, the Rebbe, looks at him and he's like horrified. And the man's like, did I do something wrong? He says, yeah. And the Ruzhiner explains to the man, he says, you should know, when your father died, he was obviously a very holy man, based upon what he's about to say. So when your father died, his soul had unfinished business in this world. He needed a tikkun, he needed a repair. He needed to finish some spiritual mission that he had not finished in this world. So what happened? When his soul went up to heaven, they figured that instead of sending him back to this world in a full-on reincarnation, for him to be born into a new baby's body, which would be a big, giant schlep an entire lifetime, he only needed a small tikkun, a small reincarnation. So what did he do? He was reincarnated into a grain of wheat, so that grain of wheat would go into a factory of making vodka, where the vodka factory would be bottled into a bottle in Ruzhin, which is where you happen to be passing by divine providence. Why were you traveling through Ruzhin on the day of your father's yahrzeit? It was all meant to be. You think you had a travel itinerary this way? Nah! It's all by divine design. You think you're hungry, you think you're thirsty, it's your soul pining for your destiny. Your soul brought you to Ruzhin, here, to be able to meet up with your father's soul reincarnated in a vodka grain inside of this bottle of vodka. Okay, so the guy's like, where are you going with this? He says, well, you just blew it because you just drank the vodka. And what should I have done? The man says, you should have made a blessing. What's the blessing? Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who created everything through his speech. We say this blessing, this affirmation, this declaration, declaring Hashem Echad, declaring one God upon the food that we eat, as long as it doesn't grow in a tree or in the ground. We say Shakol Niyeh B'Dvaro before you eat. And I want to encourage you to do this, folks. I want you to memorize this blessing. I want you to memorize. Please memorize this blessing. If you have the blue sitter, I'm going to show you what page it's on in the blue sitter so you can memorize it. I think you should write it on your phone or something and you could memorize it. The blessing appears in the blue sitter on page 86. 86. Here, it's a second to bottom blessing over meat, fish, milk, eggs, cheese, mushrooms, as well as liquids except wine or grape juice. Basically, anything that doesn't grow in a tree or on the ground. You say, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, by whose word all things came to be. Blessed, page number 86, second to last blessing on the page. When you say this blessing, the Ruzhiner said, you would have thus elevated the soul of your father, who was a soul sent. He was sent on a mission to meet up with you with the hopes and aspirations that you would do the right thing and complete his mission in this world. Now, I love the story. Well, it ends it up because the guy asks his father, asks the Rebbe, so what am I supposed to do? He says, what am I supposed to do now? So he said, the Rebbe told him, make sure that whatever you do now, you should be mindful. How would I know which sparks? Where's the next spark? He said, you should be mindful every single time that you encounter food or every physical object for that matter. You should think about how you can use it for a holy purpose. We don't know where it's going to be, though. So you want to make sure that if it's Pesach time, you're eating matzah. If it's Sukkot time, you're in a sukkah. If it's Yom Kippur, you're not eating. If it's morning time, you're laying tefillin. If it's food, you're making the appropriate blessings before and after, and so on and so forth. And that's how you're able to elevate the sparks, because we don't get the memo of where those sparks are. But what we do know is this. Here's something that we do know. What we do know is that when something is incredibly difficult, like the Egyptian slavery, we're able to decipher a code. Remember the bris, Bein HaBesarim, the covenant of the parts, which was the promise made to Abraham 400 years before the Egyptian Exodus. 400 years before the Egyptian Exodus. There was no Pharaoh, there was no Egyptians, there was no Moses. 400 years, God tells Abraham, your children will be strangers in a foreign land. Va'avadum ve'inu otam 400 shana, and they will work them, and they will torture them for 400 years. But afterwards they will emerge with great possessions. Now, what does that mean? I mean, seriously, if somebody were to offer you, listen, Marty, I'm going to put you through 400 years of pure hell, but don't worry, you'll come out with a few shekels. You ready?
400 years.
Pure torture. Thank you, but no thank you.
But it really wasn't 400 years of torture.
Yeah. So there's a whole calculation about exactly how it works and when it started. Without getting into the technical details,
Sure.
You're right. It wasn't exactly 400 years. It was 210 years, but it was 86 years, and we're not complaining. We're not complaining that we didn't get the full measure of the 400 years. We say thank you. Whatever the calculation was, we're grateful, right? But understand the logic behind it. The logic behind it is that what God was saying to him, it's not that I'm sending you on an impossible employment of an indentured servant for you to suffer miserably so that you will come out with a few bucks. That makes no sense. No. The only way that these sparks can be elevated is if you endure that kind of harsh tribulation. And still maintain your integrity. Exactly. Remember, only 20% of the Jews made it out of Egypt. Only 20% of the Jews made it out of Egypt. That's what Rashi tells us. Yeah, and he disagreed, and I don't know where he got that information from. He must have missed that Rashi. Seriously, the guy must have missed that Rashi.
But I argued with him.
Yeah, fair enough. Good. I love it. This is good Jewish learning when you argue like this. It's very important. This is classic Jewish learning. So, bottom line is that we learn from here an incredible inspiration. When you find something being very difficult for you, if it's very hard for you to make a living somewhere, if it's very hard for you to get along with someone in your family, if it's very hard for you to, deal with anti-Semitism, right? If you have rough neighbors like in Gaza or in Lebanon or in Yemen or in Iran or in Syria,
Everybody.
yeah. Then what does that tell you? What does it say? Colombia? Oh, Colombia the U. Yeah, Colombia U. Right. If you have tough neighbors, then what does that tell you? It tells you that instead of running away from your problems, this is part of your destiny. And it's your problems that you need to confront in order to sublimate them, because that's where your sparks are lying. Now, why do I give you this full introduction? Because we're learning Chassidus today about the Mitzvasa, Mishetishka, HaChama. We're learning the discourse here in this book. It's been taking us several months, but you know what? We're doing it slowly and deliberately. We're learning about the importance of facing. Well, we said it's all about the Hanukkah lights which are lit in the darkness, right? The importance of illuminating the darkness, which is a very critical point of illuminating the darkness, facing the darkness. And we learned in the recent episodes of this discussion, we learned that when you have a problem, remember, number one, you're going to make God laugh. Right? When you make God laugh, when you create a punchline, you take a negative and turn it into positive, you turn dark into light. When you turn a dysfunctional situation into a functional situation, that's a punchline. That's an unexpected result. And that's what's going to cause God to laugh, which we learned is when you make God laugh, then God allows you to overrule his decision, right? Which is a good thing for us. And the second thing we learned is that when you overcome the evil inclination, when you overcome the sitra achra, when you suppress your desire for sin and you do the right thing, then you unleash the infinite light over the universe. That's what we learned, right? So now we're applying that on a very practical level. When we get about to say now that when you apply this to the idea of sparks, when you apply this notion to the idea of sparks, of divine energy that's trapped in the universe, you come to the realization that your problems are not something you should be running away from. That's actually your destiny. Your problem is not your problem, it's your assignment. I say it over and over. It's your assignment. It's what you're supposed to do. So don't run away from your assignment. Imagine a soldier goes to Gaza and then he calls up his general and he says, "Sir, I can't do this. The people are very, very mean." And the general's like,
Hello.
I don't know what I'm supposed to tell you, but that's your mission, man. Yes, they're mean. They're firing bullets at me. I'm like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what you're there for. Right? Imagine you say that with your problems. Well, I've got problems and life is being very mean to me. Okay, so go right in. And remember, Hashem has empowered you to overcome. So what we're about to learn is one new step in this, is that the more difficult the situation, the more intense is the spark embedded. So if something is if you live a life which is normal, versus a person who lives a life that's not normal. Let's talk about a person who just has a normal life. Everything is fine. He has no unusual circumstances, as if there is such a thing. And then there's another person that's struggling with addiction or codependency, right? So this guy's in pain, the second guy's in pain, and the first guy's just normal. You would think that the second guy who's in pain is at a disadvantage. Comes Chassidus and teaches us no. The fact that you're in pain means that you're dealing with much more powerful sparks of divine energy that your soul needs to uncover. And that's the reason why you've been put into that circumstance. And perhaps this is the reason why Rabbi Dr. Abraham Tversky, the renowned psychologist and rabbi who wrote over 80 books on healing and therapy and Torah, he says that he has never met people more spiritual than the addicts who have recovered. Why is it that addicts who recover are more spiritual than normal people? Because they have uncovered they have uncovered the powerful divine sparks that they have uncovered in their encounters, and that they have sublimated, and that's why it manifests in a elevated form of spiritual sensitivity and experience over people that don't. Let's take a look at this concept in the book of Chassidus, page 229, bottom of the page. Page 229. This is especially true considering the point explained earlier that every descent is for the sake of an even greater ascent. This means that the godly sparks that are in exile within the klipos, the forces of challenge, of struggle, reach an even greater level than the extremely lofty source from which they originally descended when the Jewish people revealed their ultimate purpose within creation. This means, and going back, that the godly sparks that are in exile within Klippas reach an even greater level than the extremely lofty source from which they originally descended when the Jewish people revealed the ultimate source within creation. What happens is that when you extract a spark from its state of captivity, from its hostage status within the dysfunction of this world where it finds itself, like in Egyptian slavery, like in Gaza, then what happens is that you're actually elevating that spark to a higher level than when it came from, right? You're actually elevating it to a higher place than where it originated from. Every descent is for the sake of an even greater ascent. If it descended to come back to the same spot, it would be pointless. It's got to be that it goes down in order to rise up even higher. Not only are these sparks elevated to a greater but comparable, extremely lofty level, but when they are used to accomplish the ultimate purpose of creation, the creation of a dira b'tachtonim for God's essence, to create a home for God Almighty, when you are in New Zealand or Canada or Helsinki or Palm Beach, and you're using your dysfunction as an opportunity to create a home for God in this difficult space. Let's say you argue with your country club manager at Mirasol, and you say, maybe we should have a Seder that's kosher this year, right? And that's a highly dysfunctional situation, right? Because your odds are stacked against you. Then these sparks are elevated to God's essence, which is incomparably greater and cannot be considered a measurable level at all. When you use those sparks extraction in order to create a home for God, if you use those dysfunctional states in order to create a home for God, then what you're doing is that you're elevating those sparks not only to a level of divine revelation, emanation, the rays of God's shining, you actually bring them in to the essence of God. That's a bit of an esoteric point. And thus, you're essentially bringing the sparks home. You're bringing the hostages home. And what you're doing is that you're revealing God's essence in this world. Just to tie it all together, returning to the previous topic of how one reveals the ultimate source of the klippas, when he successfully utilizes them for their ultimate purpose, the Rebbe connects it to the concept of the feet of the Talmud explained earlier. We learned earlier that the lights of the Hanukkah lights, when you shine up in the darkness, you only allowed to light the Hanukkah lights until the scavengers are finished in the marketplace, right? That's what it says in the Talmud, which seems like a very random time slot. Until the scavengers, the wood collectors, are no longer in the marketplace, right? The marketplace is a place of plurality. It's a place of the opposite of one God. It's a place of the perception of multiple powers, right? That's the marketplace. And the scavengers are, in Hebrew, the word scavengers, also Talmudoi, has the same letters as moredet, which means the rebels. They're basically the rebels of divine unity, the rebels of monotheism. So what you do is you're supposed to light the Hanukkah candles until the rebels of monotheism are no longer. What does that mean? It means until you've transformed the negative into the positive. The word the word in Hebrew, in the original Hebrew, until they are no longer, the word is kalia. Kalia means destroy, or it can mean ecstasy. The word kali can also mean ecstasy. Until you've brought the rebels of monotheism, the opponents of God, to a state of divine ecstasy. Until you've transformed the most dysfunctional into the functional. That is the purpose of the lighting of the Hanukkah lights. So in other words, instead of looking at the Hanukkah lights in this profound explanation, instead of looking at the lighting of the Hanukkah lights as a chronological directive, as a timing issue, that you only allow to light the Hanukkah lights until such time as the scavengers are no longer in the marketplace. It's not a chronological directive, it's a psychological directive. It's telling us that the purpose of the lighting of the night, the illuminating of the night of the Hanukkah lights, is in order to transform the forces of negativity, the forces of dysfunction in our own lives, including our scoffing mother-in-law, right? And our teenage child who's making fun of all of our spiritual sensitivities, until they too are inspired. Can you imagine? There's two kinds of people. There's two kinds of Bali Teshuvah. There's a Baal Teshuvah who becomes more religious, more observant, more spiritually sensitized. But by doing so, he alienates the rest of his family. This is the guy that's highly critical of everybody around him. You're not doing it right, and you're not doing it right, and I can't believe you're doing it this way, and this is wrong, and that is wrong, and everybody's like, what the hell happened to that guy? No. And then there's the Baal Teshuvah that in his spiritual journey becomes the sweetest, kindest, most sensitive and beautiful person, to the point that people say, oh my God, his wife that isn't even on that spiritual journey, she looks at him and she's like, what is the rabbi teaching you? You've become so kind, so thoughtful, so empathetic. For 50 years I'm married to you, and you were never such a mensch. This is amazing. I want to go to shul with you. Right? You see the two different approaches. What the Torah is telling us, and Yonatan, that's exactly your story. What the Torah is telling us is that you're supposed to light the Hanukkah lights. You're supposed to transform your darkness, not with a baseball bat. Honey draws more bees than vinegar. Don't fight your darkness with harshness. Fight your darkness with confidence, with sensitivity, in a way that's going to inspire everybody around you. Let's take a look. Early in this discourse, we discussed two explanations of the word kalia. Kalia can mean destroyed or ecstasy. Number one, destroyed, which refers to the complete nullification of the force of the Talmud who rebel against God. I mean, that's one way of doing things, is that you're basically going to make the rest of your family feel so bad about themselves, is that you're going to break their ego. That may or may not work. It might backfire. In the second interpretation is ecstasy or intense yearning, kalesa nefesh, which refers to the complete transformation of the Talmud, eliciting an intense yearning for godliness within them. Imagine if your teenage daughter can say, Dad, you've become so kind and gentle to me. I'm so grateful to you. I want to get to know you better. I want to spend more time with you. You're getting me. I want to get you. Can you imagine a teenage granddaughter saying that to you? No. You got work to do, my friend. The concept we are now discussing parallels these two explanations. When one reveals the ultimate purpose of the Talmud of the rebels, remember, it's the ultimate purpose of the Talmud. They're not there to make your life miserable. They're there for you to sublimate them. By successfully overcoming the challenges that they pose to the service of God, thus destroying their power, he releases the godly spark within them, and thus elevates them, the rebels, the forces of dysfunction in your life, elevates them to their source, the concept of ecstasy of kalesa nefesh, the intense love that the soul has for God, which causes it to want to return to its source. Wow. This, my friends, is the secret of dysfunction. It's a secret of darkness. It's there for us to be able to elevate the sparks. The more intense the dysfunction, the more intense the spark that's waiting for you to redeem. Yeah.